Greenwood, Indiana, September 12, 2017. Greenwood was the kind of town where everyone knew each other, and the biggest excitement was the annual 4th of July parade. Tucked away in the quiet suburbs of Indiana, it was the perfect place to raise a family. The streets were lined with well-kept lawns, and the neighbors always waved to one another. To the outside world, Greenwood was the epitome of the American dream. But as with all dreams, there was something beneath the surface, something no one ever saw coming. The O'Connor family was no different from any other in Greenwood. Mark O'Connor, a successful accountant, was known for his easygoing nature and strong work ethic. He was the kind of guy who would mow his neighbor's lawn just because he had the time. His wife, Jessica, was a stay-at-home mom who dedicated her life to their 2-year-old daughter, Emma. She was warm, kind, and had a smile that could light up a room. Together, they were the perfect family, or so it seemed. The O'Connors lived in a cozy, 2-story home with a white picket fence and a swing set in the backyard. On warm evenings, the family could often be found playing outside, Emma giggling as Mark pushed her on the swing. It was a life that many envied, a picture of happiness that seemed almost too perfect to be true. But life in Greenwood was about to change in ways no one could have predicted. With Jessica planning to go back to school part-time and Mark's job getting busier, they decided it was time to hire a babysitter. After browsing through countless profiles online, they found Carly. Carly was a 24-year-old college student at Indiana University, just a short drive from Greenwood. Her profile was spotless. She had glowing references, a background in child psychology, and she seemed to have a genuine love for kids. When the O'Connors met her, they were immediately taken by her cheerful demeanor and the way she interacted with Emma. Jessica felt at ease leaving her daughter in Carly's care, and Mark appreciated how responsible she seemed. Little did they know, this decision would be the start of something dark and twisted. Carly quickly became a regular fixture in the O'Connor household. She was there every Tuesday and Thursday, picking Emma up from preschool, making her snacks, and keeping her entertained until Mark and Jessica came home from work. The O'Connors grew to trust Carly completely. She was like a part of the family, always there with a smile and a willingness to help out in any way she could. At first, everything seemed perfect. Carly was great with Emma, always coming up with new games to play and stories to tell. But over time, Jessica began to notice something strange. Carly started to show up earlier than she needed to, sometimes hours before she was scheduled to start. She also began staying late, offering to help with dinner or clean up around the house. It was subtle at first, just little things that Jessica dismissed as Carly being helpful. But soon, it became clear that Carly's attentiveness wasn't entirely innocent. Jessica began to feel uncomfortable with how often Carly mentioned Mark in conversation, always finding a way to bring him up. She would ask Jessica questions about his work, his hobbies, and his habits, questions that seemed a bit too personal for someone in her position. Jessica brushed it off, telling herself that Carly was just trying to be friendly. But in the back of her mind, a seed of doubt was planted. One evening, after Mark had come home late from work, Carly lingered longer than usual. She kept finding excuses to stay, asking Mark questions about his day, offering to make him a cup of coffee. Jessica watched from the kitchen, her unease growing as she noticed the way Carly looked at her husband. There was something in Carly's eyes, something that made Jessica's skin crawl. It wasn't admiration or respect. It was something else entirely, something darker. Jessica decided to have a talk with Mark that night after Carly left. She expressed her concerns, but Mark laughed them off, telling her she was being paranoid. He assured her that Carly was just being friendly and that there was nothing to worry about. Jessica wanted to believe him, but the unease in her gut wouldn't go away. As the days turned into weeks, Carly's behavior became more unsettling. She started dressing differently, wearing clothes that were more revealing, always perfectly done up as if she were going on a date rather than babysitting. She would stand a little too close to Mark, laugh a little too hard at his jokes, and find reasons to touch his arm or shoulder. Jessica's suspicions grew, but she couldn't bring herself to fire Carly. She was afraid of causing a scene, of making something out of nothing. But deep down, she knew that something was very wrong. She just couldn't put her finger on it. The tension in the O'Connor household began to build. Mark remained oblivious, wrapped up in his work and his responsibilities as a father. But Jessica could feel the storm brewing, a sense of dread that hung over her like a dark cloud. She didn't know it yet, but the life they had built, the perfect life in the perfect town, was about to be shattered in the most horrific way imaginable. As the autumn leaves began to fall in Greenwood, Carly's presence in the O'Connor household intensified. What started as subtle gestures had now become overt displays of her fixation on Mark. She was no longer just the cheerful babysitter who blended seamlessly into the background. She was a looming shadow, an ever-present figure whose intentions were growing darker by the day. It was October 3rd, 2017, a Tuesday afternoon like any other. Jessica was busy with her schoolwork in the dining room, while Carly played with Emma in the living room. The sound of Emma's laughter filled the house, but it did little to soothe Jessica's nerves. She could sense Carly's eyes on her, could feel the tension that had settled between them, thick and suffocating. Jessica glanced up, catching Carly watching her from the doorway, a strange smile playing on her lips. "Is everything okay, Carly?" Jessica asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Oh, everything's fine," Carly replied, her tone sweet and innocent. "Emma's just so much fun to be around. She reminds me a lot of Mark, you know? She has his eyes." Jessica forced a smile, but the comment sent a chill down her spine. Carly's obsession with Mark was no longer something she could ignore. It was creeping into every conversation, every interaction, and it was becoming impossible to dismiss as harmless. Later that evening, when Mark arrived home from work, Carly greeted him at the door before Jessica even had the chance. She handed him a beer she had already opened, something Jessica found oddly unsettling. Mark seemed oblivious to the growing tension, giving Carly a friendly smile and a quick thank you before heading upstairs to change out of his work clothes. Carly watched him go, her eyes lingering on him far longer than they should have. Jessica's unease turned into something sharper, a gnawing fear that Carly's obsession was spiraling out of control. She decided to confront Carly, hoping to put an end to whatever was happening before it got worse. That night, after Emma had gone to bed, Jessica found Carly in the kitchen, cleaning up the dinner dishes. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the conversation she had been dreading. "Carly, can we talk?" Jessica began, trying to keep her tone calm. "Of course, Jessica," Carly replied, turning to face her with that same unsettling smile. Jessica hesitated, searching for the right words. "I've noticed that you've been spending a lot of time with Mark. I just want to make sure that everything is professional, you know? I mean, you're a great babysitter, but some boundaries need to be respected." Carly's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I'm just trying to be helpful, Jessica. Mark works so hard, and I see how much he does for this family. I just want to lighten the load." Jessica felt a wave of anger rise within her. "Carly, I appreciate your help, but it's important that you understand your role here. You're Emma's babysitter, and we trust you with her, but that's where it ends." Carly's expression hardened, and for the first time, Jessica saw something dangerous in her eyes. "I understand perfectly, Jessica, but maybe you should ask yourself why Mark seems to need so much help. Maybe he's not getting everything he needs from you." The words hit Jessica like a slap to the face. She felt her heart race, anger boiling in her chest. Before she could respond, Carly turned on her heel and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Jessica standing there, stunned and seething. The next few days were a blur of tension and anxiety. Jessica found herself constantly on edge, watching Carly's every move, looking for any sign that her obsession was deepening. And it was. Carly's behavior grew bolder, more brazen. She began leaving little gifts for Mark, his favorite snacks, a new tie she claimed she found on sale, even a handwritten note thanking him for being such a great boss, which Jessica found particularly disturbing. Mark, ever the optimist, continued to dismiss Jessica's concerns. He assured her that Carly was just a nice girl trying to do her job, and that there was nothing to worry about. But Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She began to notice small changes in Mark as well. He was more distant, more distracted. He spent more time at work and less time at home, and when he was home, he seemed preoccupied, his mind elsewhere. On October 10th, 2017, Jessica came home early from class, hoping to surprise Mark with a nice dinner. She opened the front door quietly, not wanting to disturb Emma if she was napping. But as she stepped into the house, she heard voices, Carly's voice and Mark's. They were in the living room, and as Jessica approached, she could hear the tone of their conversation. It was casual, friendly, But there was something in Carly's voice that made Jessica's blood run cold. She stopped just outside the doorway, listening. "Just saying, Mark, you deserve someone who appreciates you," Carly was saying, her voice soft and sweet. "Someone who sees how hard you work and is grateful for everything you do." "Carly, that's enough," Mark replied. But there was an uncertainty in his voice, a hesitation that Jessica had never heard before. Jessica's heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't stand it anymore. She stepped into the living room, her eyes blazing with anger. "What the hell is going on here?" Jessica demanded, her voice trembling with fury. Both Carly and Mark turned to face her, surprise and guilt flashing across their faces. Mark stood up quickly, trying to explain, but Jessica wasn't listening. Her focus was on Carly, who was standing there with a smug look on her face, as if she had won some invisible battle. "I think it's time for you to leave, Carly," Jessica said, her voice shaking. Carly didn't argue. She simply picked up her things, gave Mark one last lingering look, and walked out the door. Jessica watched her go, feeling a mix of relief and dread. Carly was gone, but the damage had been done. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and Jessica knew that their lives would never be the same. As the door closed behind Carly, Jessica turned to Mark, tears welling in her eyes. "What is happening to you, Mark?" But Mark had no answers. He just stood there, looking lost, as if the life they had built together was slipping through his fingers. And as the night closed in around them, Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something far worse. The dark obsession had taken root, and it was only a matter of time before it consumed them all. The dawn broke over Greenwood in shades of gray, the rain having finally ceased, leaving the streets wet and empty. The O'Connor house stood silent, an eerie stillness hanging in the air. Inside, the remnants of the previous night's chaos were evident. Broken glass on the floor, furniture overturned, and the lingering sense of dread that seemed to permeate every corner. Jessica woke up in a hospital bed, her head pounding and her memory foggy. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled her nostrils as she blinked against the harsh fluorescent lights. It took her a few moments to realize where she was, and when she did, a wave of panic washed over her. "Mark," she murmured, her voice weak and raspy. A nurse appeared at her side, her expression one of gentle concern. "Mrs. O'Connor, you're awake. You've been through quite an ordeal. Just try to relax, okay?" Jessica struggled to sit up, her heart racing. "Where's my husband? Is he okay? What happened?" The nurse hesitated, glancing towards the door. "The police are here, Mrs. O'Connor. They'll explain everything to you." Jessica's anxiety spiked as she watched two police officers enter the room. They wore solemn expressions, their badges gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Mrs. O'Connor, I'm Detective Harris," one of the officers said, his voice calm but serious. "We need to ask you a few questions about what happened last night." Jessica's mind raced as she tried to piece together the fragments of her memory. She remembered Carly showing up at the house, the argument, and then nothing. "Where's Mark? Is he okay?" she asked again, her voice trembling. Detective Harris exchanged a glance with his partner before answering. "Your husband is in the ICU. He's in critical condition, but the doctors are doing everything they can." Jessica felt like the ground had been ripped out from under her. What happened?" "We received a 911 call from your husband last night," Detective Harris explained. "When officers arrived at your home, they found you unconscious and your husband severely injured. Carly Mason, she was found at the scene." The name sent a jolt of terror through Jessica. "Carly, is she?" "She's in custody," the detective confirmed. "She was arrested on the spot. From what we've gathered, she attacked both you and your husband. We're still piecing together the exact sequence of events, but it's clear that she was the aggressor." Jessica's hands trembled as she covered her face, the reality of what had happened crashing down on her. "This is all my fault. I should have seen the signs. I should have done something sooner." Detective Harris shook his head. "Mrs. O'Connor, this is not your fault. Carly Mason is responsible for her actions. She had a history of instability that we were unaware of. What's important now is that you focus on your recovery and help us with the investigation." Jessica nodded numbly, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill over. "Well, Mark, will he be okay?" The detective's face softened, but there was a gravity in his tone that Jessica couldn't ignore. He's in a critical condition, but the doctors are hopeful. It's going to be a long road to recovery. Jessica swallowed hard, the weight of guilt pressing down on her chest. She couldn't shake the feeling that this nightmare was far from over. In the days that followed, Jessica remained in the hospital, her body healing but her mind in turmoil. She spent every waking moment worrying about Mark, praying that he would pull through. She couldn't bear the thought of losing him, especially not because of Carly's twisted obsession. When she was finally allowed to see Mark, the sight of him nearly broke her. He lay in the hospital bed, pale and fragile, hooked up to machines that beeped and whirred in a rhythm that kept him tethered to life. Jessica sat by his side, holding his hand, whispering words of love and encouragement, even though she wasn't sure he could hear her. Days turned into weeks, and as Mark slowly began to recover, Jessica's resolve hardened. She knew that Carly would face justice, but it wasn't enough to just let the legal system take its course. She needed to understand why this had happened, how a seemingly innocent babysitter had turned their lives upside down. When Detective Harris visited her again, Jessica was ready with questions. Why did Carly do this? What could have driven her to such an extreme? The detective sighed, his expression weary. We've been digging into Carly's past, and it turns out she had a history of mental health issues that were never fully addressed. There were incidents in her previous jobs, nothing violent, but there were signs of obsessive behavior. It seems that she fixated on your husband, and that obsession grew into something dangerous. Jessica felt